The sun was barely peeking through the curtains when Rose Thompson woke up that morning. At 78 years old, she had long been an early riser, a habit from decades of country living that never quite left her. Her small apartment wasn't much, but it was home. Walls adorned with faded photographs of children and grandchildren, shelves lined with trinkets collected over a lifetime, and in the corner of her living room, an old upright piano that had seen better days. Rose moved slowly to the kitchen, her joints stiff as they always were in the morning. She put the kettle on and glanced at the letter sitting on her countertop. Even now, 2 weeks after it had arrived, she could hardly believe what it said. The popular television show Hidden Stars wanted her to appear as a contestant. Her granddaughter Lily had secretly recorded her playing the piano during a family gathering and sent the video to the show's producers. "You've got talent, Grandma," Lily had insisted over the phone when she called to tell Rose about what she'd done. "The whole world should hear you play, not just us." Rose had laughed it off at first. Who would want to watch an old woman play the piano? But the letter was real enough, and the follow-up phone call from a young man named David from the production team had sealed the deal. They would send a car for her next Tuesday. They would provide accommodation. All she needed to do was show up and play one piece on their grand piano. As she sipped her tea, Rose's eyes drifted to a small wooden box on her bookshelf. Inside was a collection of yellowed newspaper clippings and concert programs from another lifetime. Before marriage, before children, before the small teaching job that had paid the bills for 40 years. Before life had guided her away from the path she'd once been certain she would follow. The kettle whistled, pulling her back to the present. Rose shook her head and smiled to herself. It was silly to get so worked up about a little television appearance. She would go, play her piece, have a nice story to tell her bridge club, and that would be that. What Rose didn't know was that across town, in the sleek downtown offices of the Hidden Stars production company, a very different conversation about her appearance was taking place. "Trust me, it's going to be television gold," David Chen said, sliding Rose's audition video across the glass conference table toward Paula Winters, the show's executive producer. "We set it up like we're taking her seriously. Let her play whatever simple tune she's prepared, and then have Greg make a few jokes, bring out a real pianist, and everyone has a good laugh." Paula frowned as she watched the shaky phone footage of Rose playing a simple Chopin piece at what was clearly a family birthday party. The old woman's hands moved with a certain grace, but the sound quality was terrible and the piece was basic. "I don't know, David. Making fun of sweet old ladies isn't really our brand," Paula said, though her objection lacked conviction. Ratings had been slipping this season, and they needed something to get people talking. "We're not making fun," David insisted, leaning forward. "We're subverting expectations. The audience thinks they're getting one thing and we give them another. Besides, we'll send her home with a nice check and some flowers. She'll be fine." Paula sighed and nodded. "Fine, but keep it gentle. And make sure Greg doesn't go overboard with the jokes." David grinned, already mentally drafting the segment notes. Old lady pianist would fill their Tuesday slot nicely, guaranteed to get some laughs, maybe even a few clips that could go viral, online. Neither David nor Paula noticed what was happening in the video as it continued to play on mute. How Rose's expression changed halfway through the simple piece. How her posture straightened slightly. How her fingers began to move with more purpose before the video cut off. They had already moved on to discussing the next segment. Back in her apartment, Rose had finished her tea and moved to the piano. Her morning ritual hadn't changed in 60 years. Scales first, then arpeggios, then working through whatever piece had captured her imagination that week. Today, her fingers moved automatically through the warm-ups while her mind wandered to the upcoming show. What should she play? Something simple and crowd-pleasing seemed appropriate. Maybe the Moonlight Sonata. Everyone knew that one. Or perhaps one of the easier Chopin preludes. Her fingers paused over the keys. There was another option, the piece she played only for herself, the one she had been perfecting in private for decades. Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, too ambitious perhaps, too revealing, like opening a door to a room she had kept locked for most of her adult life. Rose's hands dropped to her lap as she remembered the last time she had played it for an audience. She had been 19, auditioning for a prestigious scholarship at Juilliard. The judges had been impressed, so impressed that one of them had approached her afterward about private lessons and potential concert opportunities. Then life intervened. Her father's sudden illness, the family business that needed running, the handsome young man who didn't see the point of her moving to New York when there was a perfectly good life to be built right there in their small town. One by one, the doors to that other life had closed, until all that remained of her musical ambitions was this daily ritual at a worn-out piano in a modest apartment. Not that Rose regretted her choices. She had loved her husband deeply until his passing 10 years ago. Her children and grandchildren brought her immense joy. Her decades teaching third grade had been fulfilling in ways she couldn't have imagined as a headstrong teenager with dreams of concert halls. But sometimes, in quiet moments like this, she allowed herself to wonder about the path not taken. The telephone rang, interrupting her thoughts. It was David from the show calling to confirm final details. "Now, Mrs. Thompson," he said, his voice smoothly professional. "We just want to make sure you're comfortable with everything. The segment is very straightforward. Our host Greg will introduce you, ask a few questions about your background, and then you'll play your piece. What have you decided on, by the way?" Rose hesitated. "I was thinking perhaps Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata." "The first movement?" "Perfect," David replied a little too enthusiastically. "That's exactly the sort of thing our audience would expect. Would enjoy." Something in his tone made Rose pause. There was an undercurrent there, something not quite sincere. She had taught elementary school for 40 years. She knew when someone wasn't telling the whole truth. "Unless," she said slowly, "you think I should play something else?" No, the Beethoven is perfect," David assured her quickly. "Nice and appropriate." After they hung up, Rose sat for a long time staring at the piano. Appropriate. What an interesting choice of word. Appropriate for what exactly? For an old woman who should stick to simple, recognizable tunes? For a segment that perhaps wasn't designed to showcase talent so much as to provide entertainment of another sort? Rose wasn't naive. She watched enough television to understand how these shows worked, how they created narratives and characters out of real people. Was that what they were planning to do with her? Turn her into some kind of character? The sweet, slightly pitiable old lady who played mediocre piano? She felt a flicker of something she hadn't experienced in years. The same fire that had once driven her to practice 8 hours a day, that had made her professors predict great things for her future. Pride, determination, and perhaps a touch of righteous indignation. Rose pulled out the sheet music for Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto, Note 2 from the bench storage, though she hardly needed it anymore. Her fingers knew every note, every dynamic marking, every subtle shift in tempo. She had been playing this piece for herself for decades, gradually mastering its complexities, letting it become part of her. She began to play, slowly at first, then with increasing confidence. The rich, complex emotions of the piece filled her small apartment, longing, passion, triumph, all flowing from her weathered hands. This was who she really was, beneath the grandmotherly exterior, beneath the sensible shoes and the carefully permed white hair. This was the self she had kept alive all these years through her daily communion with the piano. As the final notes faded, Rose made her decision. Let them think what they wanted. Let them expect what they would. On Tuesday she would show them, and perhaps herself as well, exactly what this old granny could do. She carefully returned the music to the bench and went to her bedroom closet. If she was going to surprise everyone, she might as well look the part. Pushed to the back, behind her everyday clothes, was a dress she had bought years ago for her grandson's wedding. Midnight blue silk with a subtle pattern of silver threads. She had only worn it once, feeling at the time that it was perhaps too elegant, too striking for a woman her age. Now she took it out and held it against herself, looking in the mirror. Yes, this would do nicely. Not what they would expect at all. Rose smiled at her reflection, a glint of mischief in her eyes. Tuesday was going to be interesting indeed. Whatever they had planned for her appearance on Hidden Stars, she had a feeling it wasn't going to go quite the way they expected. Tuesday. Morning arrived with a light drizzle that left the city streets shining. Rose was up before dawn, her stomach fluttering with a mixture of excitement and nerves. She hadn't felt this way in decades, not since her last recital as a young woman. After her morning tea, she spent extra time on her appearance, carefully applying a touch of makeup and setting her silver hair just so. The midnight blue dress fit perfectly, complemented by a simple pearl necklace her husband had given her on their 30th anniversary. As she fastened the clasp, she could almost hear Richard's voice. "You look beautiful. Rosie, go show them what you're made of." The thought brought a smile to her face and steadied her shaking hands. At precisely 9 o'clock, a sleek black car pulled up outside her apartment building. The driver, a young man with kind eyes named Thomas, helped her into the back seat and carefully stowed her small overnight bag in the trunk. "First time on television, ma'am?" he asked, glancing at her in the rearview mirror as they pulled away from the curb. "First and likely last," Rose replied with a small laugh. "Not many talent shows looking for pianists pushing 80, Thomas chuckled. "You'd be surprised. These shows are always looking for something different. The unexpected gets views." His words lingered in Rose's mind as they drove through the city toward the television studio. The unexpected. Yes, she had a feeling that's exactly what she would be to them, though perhaps not in the way they anticipated. The studio was larger and more imposing than Rose had imagined. A maze of corridors bustling with young people carrying clipboards and speaking rapidly into headsets. Thomas handed her over to a production assistant, a girl who couldn't have been more than 25 with bright purple hair and an expression that suggested she'd rather be anywhere else. "Mrs. Thompson, I'm Zoe. I'll be taking care of you today," she said, not quite making eye contact as she checked something off on her clipboard. "We need to get you to makeup first, then we'll go over the segment details." Rose followed the girl through the winding hallways, noting how people glanced at her with expressions ranging from indifference to barely concealed amusement. Something was definitely off, but she kept her thoughts to herself as they entered a brightly lit room lined with mirrors and makeup chairs. "Our next guest," Zoe announced to the two makeup artists who were tidying their stations. One of them, a tall woman with an elaborate updo, looked up and raised an eyebrow. "The pianist?" she asked in a tone that made it clear she'd been briefed on Rose's segment. "That's right," Rose said, stepping forward and extending her hand. "Rose Thompson. Pleasure to meet you." The makeup artist, her name tag read Vivian, seemed slightly taken aback by Rose's poise but quickly recovered. "Let's get you camera ready, shall we? Have a seat." As Vivian applied foundation and powder, Rose caught snippets of conversation between Zoe and the other makeup artist. "Greg's going to have a field day," Zoe murmured, scrolling through her phone. "Did you see the segment notes?" The other makeup artist snickered. "Yeah. Gentle ribbing, then bring out Liam for the real performance. Poor thing has no idea." Rose kept her expression neutral, though her heart sank a little. So her suspicions had been correct. This wasn't about showcasing talent. It was about creating an entertaining contrast between what the audience expected from someone like her and what a real pianist could do. She was meant to be the setup for the punchline. Vivian, perhaps noticing something in Rose's eyes, worked with unexpected gentleness. "You look lovely," she said softly as she finished. "That blue dress is stunning on you." "Thank you, dear," Rose replied. "It's important to dress for the occasion, don't you think?" Before Vivian could respond, Zoe was back, ushering Rose out of the chair. "We're on a tight schedule. You need to meet with David before the taping." David was waiting in a small conference room, scrolling through his phone with a distracted air. He looked up when Rose entered and his professional smile clicked into place. "Mrs. Thompson, wonderful to meet you in person." He stood to shake her hand, gesturing for her to take a seat. "How was the drive-in? Makeup treat you well?" "Everything's been lovely," Rose said, settling into the chair across from him. "Though I did overhear something interesting in the makeup room." David's smile faltered slightly. "Oh? Something about gentle ribbing and bringing out someone named Liam for the real performance?" Rose kept her tone light, but her eyes were steady on David's face. A flush crept up his neck. Well, you know how these shows work. We like to create moments of contrast, entertainment value and all that." "I see." Rose nodded slowly. "So the plan was never to showcase my playing. It was to set me up as some kind of joke before bringing out a younger, more accomplished pianist." David shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "I wouldn't put it quite like that. We're just creating a narrative arc for the segment. The audience loves a surprise." "Yes, they certainly do," Rose agreed, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "I've always been fond of surprises myself." Before David could respond, the door opened and a tall, handsome man in his 40s burst in. This, Rose assumed, must be Greg Williams, the host of Hidden Stars. "Is this our piano granny?" he asked with a broad grin, not addressing Rose directly. "Perfect. She looks exactly right." "Greg, this is Mrs. Rose Thompson," David said, a warning note in his voice that Greg either missed or ignored. "Fantastic to meet you." "Mrs. T," Greg said, finally turning his attention to Rose. "Ready for your big moment? Just play your little piece and don't worry about a thing. I'll handle the rest." There was something so dismissive in his tone, so condescending, that Rose felt that old fire flare up again. She smiled sweetly. "I'm sure you will, Mr. Williams. I'm looking forward to it." Greg gave her a distracted pat on the shoulder and left as quickly as he'd arrived. David looked apologetic. "He's under a lot of pressure. Ratings and all that." "Of course," Rose said mildly. "We all have our pressures to deal with." A young stagehand appeared at the door. "5 minutes to places, Mr. Chen." David stood, straightening his jacket. "Well, Mrs. Thompson, it's showtime. Zoe will show you where to wait until you're introduced. Just remember, big smile, answer Greg's questions, and then play your piece. Simple as that." "Simple as that," Rose echoed, gathering her handbag. As they left the conference room, she added, "Oh, by the way, I've decided not to play the Moonlight Sonata after all." David stopped short. "What?" "But that's what we discussed. What's in the prompter?" "I know, but I've had a change of heart." "Don't worry. I think the audience will still find it entertaining." David looked like he wanted to argue, but glanced at his watch and sighed. "Fine, whatever. What will you be playing instead?" "Rachmaninoff," Rose said. "Piano Concerto No. 2, David blinked. "Isn't that a bit ambitious?" "At my age, Mr. Chen, everything is ambitious. That's what makes life interesting." With that, Rose followed Zoe toward the stage, leaving David staring after her with a puzzled expression. The waiting area was a small alcove just off stage where Rose could hear the show in progress. The audience laughed and applauded on cue, Greg's voice rising and falling as he introduced various acts. A dog trainer, a young boy who could recite hundreds of digits of pi, a family with an unusual collection of homemade instruments. Each act received enthusiastic response. Then she heard her cue. "And now, ladies and gentlemen, we have something a little different. A grandmother from our very own city, who thinks she has what it takes to impress us on the piano. Please welcome Rose Thompson." Zoe gave her a gentle push. "That's you. Good luck." Rose walked on to the brightly lit stage, momentarily dazzled by the lights and the sea of faces before her. The applause was polite but tinged with that particular quality that suggested the audience was expecting something amusing rather than impressive. Greg met her center stage, microphone in hand and that same patronizing smile on his face. "Mrs. Thompson, welcome to Hidden Stars. You look lovely tonight." "Thank you, Greg," Rose said, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. "It's wonderful to be here." "So tell us," Greg continued, "how long have you been playing the piano?" "Oh, most of my life," Rose answered. "I started when I was 5 years old. 73 years of practice." "That's dedication," Greg said with a wink to the audience. "And what will you be playing for us tonight?" This was the moment. Rose could see David in the wings, watching intently. She could feel the audience's anticipation, not for musical excellence, but for something they could chuckle at indulgently. "I'll be playing Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, she said clearly. Greg's smile faltered for just a moment. "That's quite an ambitious piece." "Yes," Rose agreed. "It is." There was a beat of awkward silence before Greg recovered. "Well then, let's see what you've got. Ladies and gentlemen, Rose Thompson." As Greg retreated to the side of the stage, Rose made her way to the grand piano that stood gleaming under the lights. It was a beautiful instrument, far superior to her old upright at home. She adjusted the bench, took a deep breath, and placed her hands on the keys. For a moment, all the years fell away. She wasn't 78-year-old Rose Thompson, retired schoolteacher and grandmother of 5. She was 19-year-old Rosie, with her whole life ahead of her and music in her soul. She began to play. The first notes filled the studio, gentle and hesitant, like raindrops at the beginning of a storm. Rose's fingers moved with practiced precision across the keys, each touch bringing forth sounds that seemed to hang in the air before dissolving into the next phrase. The opening of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 was deceptively simple, a series of chords that built slowly, creating tension, promising something more to come. In the wings, David's mouth fell open. This wasn't the halting amateur performance he had expected. Even in these opening measures, there was something different. A confidence, a control that suggested this wasn't Rose's first time playing this notoriously difficult piece. The audience, primed to offer polite, perhaps slightly condescending applause for an elderly woman's attempt at classical music, sat in confused silence. This wasn't what they had been led to expect either. And then, as the piece moved into its first crescendo, Rose's hands began to fly across the keyboard. The music swelled, filling every corner of the studio with rich, complex sound. Her left hand struck the powerful bass chords while her right wove intricate melodies above them. The musical equivalent of patting your head while rubbing your stomach. But at lightning speed and with perfect precision. Greg, who had been standing off to the side with a half-smirk ready for when Rose inevitably fumbled, felt the expression slide from his face. He glanced at the teleprompter, which was still showing his prepared joke about how it's never too late to take up a hobby, and realized none of his script would work now. In the control room, the director was frantically signaling to the camera operators. Get a close-up of her hands. No wider on her face. Get the audience reactions. The cameras swung to capture the stunned expressions of people in the front rows, then back to Rose, whose face had transformed. The polite, slightly nervous grandmother was gone. In her place was an artist completely absorbed in her craft, eyes half closed, body swaying slightly with the rhythm of the music. Occasionally her lips would part in a small smile, as though she and the music shared a private joke. The first movement of the concerto lasted nearly 11 minutes, far longer than the 2 minutes they had allotted for her segment. Nobody moved to cut her off. The stagehands, the producers, even the timekeeper stood transfixed as Rose's playing transported the entire studio to another world. Vivian, the makeup artist, had slipped out from backstage to watch from the side. Tears streamed down her face, ruining her own perfect makeup. Beside her, Zoe, the production assistant, stood with her clipboard forgotten at her side, mouth slightly open in amazement. In the third row of the audience, a gray-haired man in a neatly pressed suit leaned forward, his eyes never leaving Rose's hands. He was Liam Carter, the professional pianist they had brought in to follow Rose's performance. The real musician meant to provide contrast to what they had assumed would be her amateur playing. With 40 years of concert experience behind him, Liam recognized true mastery when he saw it. And what he saw now both humbled and delighted him. As Rose approached the end of the first movement, the music grew more intense. Her small frame seemed too fragile for the power she was producing, yet she commanded the piano with the authority of someone who had spent a lifetime with the instrument. The final chords resonated through the studio, lingering in the air for several seconds after her hands had lifted from the keys. There was a moment of absolute silence. Then, as if a dam had broken, the audience erupted. People leapt to their feet, applauding wildly, some shouting, "Bravo!" while others simply stood in stunned appreciation. A woman in the front row was openly sobbing, her hands pressed to her heart. Rose remained seated at the piano, slightly out of breath, a flush of color in her cheeks. She looked younger somehow, as though the years had fallen away during her performance. She turned to face the audience and gave a small, gracious nod. Greg, recovering his professional composure, hurried to center stage, microphone in hand. For once, the smooth-talking host seemed at a loss for words. "Mrs. Thompson, Rose, I don't even know what to say." His voice cracked slightly. "That was extraordinary," Rose smiled. "Thank you, Greg, that's very kind." "Kind? No, I'm being honest. That was one of the most incredible performances I've ever witnessed." He turned to the audience. "Wouldn't you agree?" Another round of thunderous applause answered him. "I think we all want to know," Greg continued once the noise had died down enough for him to be heard. "Where did that come from? Have you performed professionally?" Rose shook her head. "Not for a very long time. I studied at Juilliard briefly when I was young, but life took me in a different direction." "Different direction?" Greg echoed, still trying to process what had just happened to his carefully planned segment. "What do you mean?" "Well, my father fell ill and I had to return home to help with the family. Then I met Richard, my late husband, and we started our own family." Her eyes took on a faraway look. "I taught third grade for 40 years. It was a wonderful life, full of its own kind of music. But you kept playing," Greg prompted, genuinely curious now. "Every day," Rose nodded. "An hour in the morning, sometimes more in the evening after the children were in bed. The piano has been my constant companion. From the wings, David watched with a mixture of shock and something else. Shame, perhaps, at how quickly he had judged this woman. He had seen her as nothing more than a prop for entertainment, a punchline to a joke nobody had told her. Now she stood center stage, receiving the kind of ovation usually reserved for concert halls and professional musicians. Liam Carter, the professional pianist, made his way backstage and approached David. "You can cancel my segment," he said quietly. "I'm not following that. It would be like serving fast food after a 5-star meal." David nodded, still dazed. "Did you know she was this good? When you saw the program?" Liam shook his head. "No one knew. That's what makes it magical." He looked at Rose with undisguised admiration. "Some people play the notes. Others play music. He paused, searching for the right words. "She doesn't just play the music. She becomes it." On stage, Greg was asking Rose if she would consider playing the second movement. "Oh, I don't know," Rose demurred. "I've already taken up more time than I was supposed to." "Please," Greg said, and this time there was no trace of his earlier condescension. "I think I speak for everyone when I say we want to hear more." Rose looked out at the audience, still on their feet, still applauding. She saw faces shining with genuine emotion, not the polite interest or amused tolerance she had expected, but real connection. These people had heard her, truly heard her, perhaps in a way that no one had in decades. "Well," she said with a small smile, "if you're sure." As she turned back to the piano, she caught sight of David in the wings. Their eyes met briefly and she gave him a small nod, not triumphant or smug, but grateful. In his own way, he had given her this moment, this chance to share the music that had lived inside her for so long. The second movement began softly, a gentle contrast to the drama of the first. This was music of reflection, of longing, of quiet joy and subtle sorrow. Rose's touch on the keys was lighter now, each note placed with exquisite care, like someone arranging flowers or writing a love letter. In the control room, the director had abandoned all attempts to follow the show's schedule. "Just stay with her," he instructed the camera operators. This is gold, and indeed it was. Viewers at home, who had tuned in expecting the usual mix of amateur talents and comedic moments, found themselves unexpectedly moved by the sight of this elderly woman bringing such beauty into the world. Social media was already buzzing, clips of Rose's performance being shared with captions like, "You won't believe what this grandmother can do," and "the most beautiful thing you'll hear today." Back in the studio, Zoe had moved to stand next to Vivian, both of them watching in silent wonder. "I've been working on this show for 3 years," Zoe whispered, "and I've never seen anything like this." Vivian nodded, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "It's like seeing someone's soul laid bare." As Rose played the final notes of the second movement, softer and more delicate than the first, there was another moment of breathless silence before the applause began again. If anything, even more enthusiastic than before. Greg approached the piano once more, his usual slick persona completely gone. In its place was something more genuine, a man deeply moved by what he had witnessed. "Rose," he said, using her first name naturally now, all pretense of the piano granny segment forgotten. "I think I speak for everyone when I say thank you. What you've shared with us today isn't just music. It's a reminder that appearances can be deceiving, that extraordinary talent can exist in the most unexpected places, and that it's never too late to share your gifts with the world." Rose smiled, touched by his sincerity. "Thank you, Greg, but I'm not sure those are the lessons here." "No?" Greg asked, offering her the microphone. "What would you say they are?" Rose thought for a moment, looking out at the sea of faces all focused on her with rapt attention. "Perhaps it's that we all contain multitudes," she said finally. "That the life you see, an old woman with white hair and sensible shoes, is just the surface. Beneath that are all the lives I might have lived, all the choices made and not made, all the loves and losses and daily small sacrifices that make up a human existence." She smiled, a quiet joy lighting her face. "And music. Music is how I've kept all those possibilities alive." The studio lights dimmed as the show cut to commercial, but the buzz in the room only grew louder. Audience members turned to each other, talking animatedly about what they had just witnessed. Several people were dabbing at their eyes with tissues. A few were already on their phones, undoubtedly sharing the experience on social media. Rose remained seated at the piano, suddenly feeling the fatigue in her fingers and shoulders. It had been years since she had played both movements in full with such intensity. A slight tremor ran through her hands, the aftermath of adrenaline and emotion. Greg crouched beside the piano bench, his microphone off, speaking to her quietly. "That was truly incredible. Mrs. Thompson, I owe you an apology for how we planned this segment. We completely misjudged you and I'm deeply sorry." Rose patted his hand. "No harm done, dear. Though I must admit it was rather satisfying to see the look on your face when I started playing." Greg laughed, a genuine sound quite different from his practiced on-camera chuckle. "I bet it was. You could have knocked me over with a feather." He hesitated, then added, "Would you be willing to stay for a bit after the show? I think there might be some people who'd like to meet you." Before Rose could respond, David hurried over, followed by a tall, distinguished-looking man Rose recognized as Liam Carter, the professional pianist who had been scheduled to follow her. "Mrs. Thompson," David began, his earlier smugness replaced by something like awe. "That was, well, extraordinary doesn't quite cover it." "Thank you, Mr. Chen," Rose said, unable to keep a small note of satisfaction from her voice. "I hope it wasn't too disruptive to your programming schedule." David had the grace to look embarrassed. "Sometimes disruption is exactly what we need." He gestured to the man beside him. "This is Liam Carter. He was supposed to perform after you, but I wouldn't dream of it now," Liam interrupted, extending his hand to Rose. "It would be like following Horowitz or Rubinstein. Some acts simply can't be followed." Rose felt a flush of pleasure at being compared to such legendary pianists. "You're too kind, Mr. Carter. I'm familiar with your recordings. Your interpretation of Chopin's ballades is quite wonderful." Liam looked surprised and pleased. "You've heard my work?" "Of course. Just because I'm old doesn't mean I don't keep up with the world of music." Rose smiled, then winced slightly as she flexed her fingers. The arthritis that usually lay dormant was making itself known after her exertions. Liam noticed immediately. "You're in pain. Do you need anything? Ice, perhaps?" No. It's just the usual complaints of age. Nothing serious." A young woman appeared with a bottle of water, which Rose accepted gratefully. It was Zoe, the production assistant, looking at Rose with new eyes. "Mrs. Thompson, that was amazing," she said quietly. I didn't expect—" She trailed off, clearly struggling to express herself. "Thank you, dear," Rose replied. "And please call me Rose." The studio floor manager was signaling frantically. 30 seconds to air." Greg straightened up. "We're coming back from commercial. Mrs. Thompson, Rose, would you be willing to say a few more words? Our viewers will want to know more about you." Rose nodded, though truthfully she was beginning to feel the weight of the day. It had been a long time since she'd been the center of so much attention. But there was also a wonderful, almost forgotten feeling beginning to bubble up inside her. The thrill of performance, of connecting with an audience through music. It had been her dream once, so many years ago. To taste it again, even briefly, was unexpectedly sweet. The cameras began rolling again, and Greg introduced the next segment with uncharacteristic sincerity. "Ladies and gentlemen, if you've just joined us, you've missed something truly remarkable. Rose Thompson, who came to our show as what we thought would be a novelty act, has proven to be one of the most talented pianists we've ever featured. Rose, our viewers at home will want to know, how did you develop such extraordinary skill while remaining virtually unknown in the music world?" Rose considered the question. How to explain the path her life had taken, the choices that had led her away from concert halls and toward classrooms filled with children. How to convey that she didn't regret those choices, even as she wondered sometimes about the road not taken. "Life is full of crossroads, Greg," she began. "When I was 19, I had the opportunity to pursue music professionally. I was studying at Juilliard and my professors thought I had promise. But my father became ill and our family needed me, so I came home." She paused, remembering that difficult time, the telegram from her mother, the hurried packing of her small dormitory room, the tearful goodbye to her piano professor who had urged her to return when she could. "I meant to go back, but then I met Richard, fell in love, got married. We had 3 wonderful children. I taught school to help with the bills, and somehow 50 years went by." "But you never stopped playing," Greg prompted. "No, never. The piano was my sanctuary, my solace, my joy. Every morning before the household woke up, every evening after the dishes were done, that was my time with the music. Just for me." She smiled at the memory. My husband used to joke that he was in a love triangle with Chopin and Rachmaninoff. The audience laughed softly, warmly, and no one knew. All this talent, and you never performed publicly? Oh, I played at church sometimes, school recitals, community events. But nothing like this. She gestured to the grand piano, the lights, the cameras. This is quite something else. From the side of the stage, Liam Carter stepped forward. Greg, seeing him, waved him over. Ladies and gentlemen, Liam Carter was scheduled to perform for you tonight. But given what we've just experienced, he's asked to speak instead. Liam joined them, his manner respectful as he addressed Rose directly. Mrs. Thompson, what we heard today wasn't just technically impressive, though it certainly was that. It was music played with a lifetime of feeling behind it. That's something that can't be taught, only lived. He turned to face the audience. I've been fortunate enough to perform in concert halls around the world, but I've rarely heard Rachmaninoff played with such depth and understanding. Rose felt tears prick her eyes at this praise from a respected professional. Thank you, Mr. Carter. That means a great deal coming from you. Call me Liam, please. He hesitated, then continued. I'm playing with the symphony next month, a special program of Rachmaninoff's works. I would be honored if you would consider performing as a guest soloist. A murmur of excitement ran through the audience. Rose sat very still, hardly believing what she was hearing. Me? Perform with the symphony? Yes, the Piano Concerto No. 2, all 3 movements with full orchestral accompaniment as Rachmaninoff intended it. For a moment, Rose couldn't speak. The magnitude of the offer overwhelmed her. To perform on a professional stage with a full orchestra, the dream she had set aside so long ago suddenly within reach, I don't know what to say, she managed finally. It's been so long since I've played with an orchestra. You don't have to decide right now, Liam assured her. But I hope you'll consider it. Greg, sensing the emotional weight of the moment, stepped in smoothly. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we're witnessing the beginning of an extraordinary new chapter in Rose Thompson's life. And it all started here on Hidden Stars. The audience applauded enthusiastically. Rose smiled, feeling both overwhelmed and strangely light, as though a door long closed had suddenly swung open. As the show wrapped up and the audience began to file out, Rose found herself surrounded by people, producers, crew members, audience members who had lingered, all wanting to speak with her to tell her how moved they had been by her playing. An elderly man in a well-worn suit approached, waiting patiently at the edge of the group until there was a break in the conversation. Mrs. Thompson, he said, his voice soft but clear, my name is Harold Wilson. I teach music at the community college. What you did today, it reminded me why I fell in love with music in the first place. Would you consider coming to speak to my students? They could learn so much from you, and not just about piano technique. Before Rose could answer, a young woman with bright eyes stepped forward. I'm with the Daily Chronicle. Would you be willing to do an interview about your journey? Your story could inspire so many people. David, watching from nearby, saw Rose's slight look of bewilderment and stepped in. I think Mrs. Thompson has had quite a day. Perhaps we could arrange these requests for another time. Rose shot him a grateful look. Her mind was whirling with possibilities, opportunities, invitations, things she had never expected to come her way at 78 years old. It was exciting, yes, but also a bit frightening. What would this mean for her quiet life, her daily routines, her bridge club on Wednesday afternoons? As if reading her thoughts, Liam appeared at her side. It's a lot to take in, isn't it? He said quietly. Yes, Rose admitted. I'm not sure I'm ready for all this attention. Liam nodded understandingly. Fame can be overwhelming, especially when it comes unexpectedly. But remember, you don't have to say yes to everything. Take what brings you joy, leave the rest. Joy. Yes, that was what she had felt at the piano today. Pure, uncomplicated joy. The same feeling that had drawn her to music as a child, that had sustained her through decades of playing for herself and her family. If this unexpected turn of events could bring more of that into her life, perhaps it was worth the disruption. Thomas is waiting to drive you home whenever you're ready, David told her, genuinely solicitous now. And we'd like to have you back on the show next week if you're willing. A proper segment this time, to tell your story, play whatever you'd like. Rose looked around at all these people whose lives had somehow become entangled with hers in the space of a single afternoon. How strange life was, how full of unexpected turns. At 78, she had thought her path was set, the shape of her days fixed and familiar. And yet here she was on the threshold of something entirely new. I think, she said slowly, that I would like that very much. 1 month later, Rose sat in the green room of the Symphony Hall, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She wore a new dress for the occasion, midnight blue like the one from the TV show, but with subtle silver embroidery that caught the light when she moved. Her hair had been styled by a professional this time, and there was a touch of color on her lips and cheeks. In the corner of the room, a small television showed the filling concert hall. Rose watched with a mixture of excitement and terror as the seats gradually filled with people in elegant evening wear. All those people coming to hear her play. It seemed impossible even now. The last 4 weeks had passed in a whirlwind. The clip of her performance on Hidden Stars had gone viral overnight. By morning it had millions of views. By the end of the week, it had been translated into a dozen languages, shared by celebrities, and featured on national news programs. Rose had given interviews, appeared on morning shows, and been recognized on the street by strangers who wanted to tell her how much her story had touched them. Her phone rang constantly with requests and invitations to perform, to teach, to speak about her experiences. Through it all, Liam had been a steady presence, helping her navigate this unexpected fame with grace and humor. They had spent hours together at the symphony's practice rooms, working through the Rachmaninoff concerto, refining and polishing. Rose had forgotten how wonderful it was to play with others, to be part of something larger than herself. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. It was Harold Wilson, the music teacher from the community college. "May I come in?" he asked. Rose smiled and nodded. Since their meeting at the TV studio, Harold had become something of a friend. His quiet enthusiasm for music and teaching reminded her of herself in her younger days. "Nervous?" he asked, settling into a chair across from her. "Terrified," Rose admitted with a small laugh. "I keep thinking they'll all realize I'm just an old woman who got lucky once on television." Harold shook his head firmly. "No one who has heard you play would ever think that. You're the real thing, Rose. You always were. The world just didn't know it yet." Rose felt tears threatening and blinked them away. She'd cried enough happy tears in the past month to last a lifetime. "My students wanted me to give you this," Harold said, handing her a small gift bag. "They've been so inspired by your story. 3 of them have started practicing piano again after watching your performance." Inside the bag was a beautiful handmade card signed by dozens of students, and a delicate silver bracelet with a single charm, a tiny piano. "Oh, Harold, this is so thoughtful." Rose fastened the bracelet around her wrist, touched by the gesture. "Please thank them for me. I'll treasure it." Another knock at the door, and this time it was David Chen, the TV producer. He too had remained in Rose's life, first out of a sense of guilt for how he'd initially planned to portray her, then out of genuine admiration. "The documentary team is all set up," he told her. "They'll be filming the performance from the back of the hall very discreetly. You won't even notice them." The documentary had been David's idea. The late bloomer, he called it, though Rose thought that was stretching the truth a bit. She wasn't exactly blooming for the first time, just finally being seen. "How's the house looking?" Rose asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Completely sold out," David replied with a grin. "Standing room only. And wait until you see who's here." Before Rose could ask what he meant, the door opened again and her family burst in. Her son Thomas and his wife, her daughters Patricia and Beth, and all 5 of her grandchildren. Even her eldest granddaughter Lily had flown in from abroad, the one who had secretly recorded Rose playing and started this whole adventure. "Mom." Patricia rushed forward to embrace her. "You look beautiful." "Grandma, we're so proud of you," Lily said, tears in her eyes. "I told you the world needed to hear you play." Rose found herself surrounded by her family, all talking at once, all beaming with pride. It was almost too much, this outpouring of love and support. "I still can't believe you kept this hidden from us all these years," Thomas said, shaking his head in wonder. "We knew you played well, but this—" "I wasn't hiding anything," Rose protested mildly. "I was just playing for myself, for the joy of it." "Well, now you get to share that joy with a few more people," Beth said, gesturing toward the television where the concert hall was now almost full. A stage manager appeared at the door. "10 minutes, Mrs. Thompson." The family took their cue to leave, each offering a hug or word of encouragement before heading to their reserved seats in the front row. Harold and David followed, leaving Rose alone again with her thoughts. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing heart. At 78, she was about to make her debut as a soloist with a professional orchestra. It was absurd, really. Wonderful, but absurd. Her mind drifted back to her 19-year-old self, the girl who had dreamed of exactly this moment. What would that girl think, knowing she would have to wait nearly 60 years for her dream to come true? Would she be disappointed by the long delay or comforted to know that the dream never truly died? The stage manager returned. "It's time, Mrs. Thompson." Rose nodded and stood, smoothing her dress. As she followed the young woman through the backstage area, she could hear the orchestra tuning up, that beautiful cacophony of individual instruments finding harmony together. And then she was at the edge of the stage, the bright lights spilling over, the audience a sea of expectant faces. Liam was already there, conducting the orchestra through the opening piece. He turned and saw her waiting, gave her an encouraging nod. Rose took another deep breath and stepped into the light. The applause was immediate and overwhelming, people rising to their feet before she had even reached the piano. She felt a blush rise to her cheeks as she made her way across the stage, acknowledging the audience with a small, dignified bow. Liam stepped down from the podium to help her settle at the piano, adjusting the bench height for her, then leaning in to whisper, "Just like in practice. You and the music, nothing else." Rose nodded gratefully. She placed her hands on the keys, feeling their cool smoothness beneath her fingertips. In that moment, all her nerves seemed to vanish. This was what she knew, what she had always known. The piano, the music, the communion between artist and instrument. Liam returned to the podium, raised his baton, and with a small gesture, brought the orchestra to attention. Rose looked up, met his eyes, and with a silent count, they began. The familiar notes of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 filled the hall once more, but this time with the full glory of orchestral accompaniment. Rose's playing was flawless, her hands moving with the confidence of someone who had lived with this music for most of her life. The orchestra responded to her every nuance, following her lead through the rises and falls of the piece, creating something greater than any of them could achieve alone. In the front row, Rose's family watched in wonder. They had known her as mother, grandmother, widow, teacher, roles she had filled with love and dedication. Now they were seeing another facet of her, one that had always been there but somehow separate from her daily life. It was like discovering a new room in a house you thought you knew completely. As the first movement reached its powerful conclusion, Rose felt a strange sense of completion. The circle that had begun so many years ago was closing. The path she hadn't taken had somehow found its way back to her, proving that perhaps there were no wrong turns in life, only different routes to the same destination. The second and third movements flowed by in what felt like moments. Rose played with a passion and precision that belied her years, losing herself completely in the music. When the final triumphant chords resonated through the hall, there was a moment of perfect silence, that magical pause when an audience is so moved they forget to breathe. Then came the applause, thunderous, unending waves of it. The entire hall was on its feet, handkerchiefs dabbing at eyes, voices calling "Bravo!" from every corner. Liam extended his hand to help Rose rise, and together they acknowledged the orchestra, then the audience. Flowers appeared from nowhere, huge bouquets carried onto the stage by ushers. Rose accepted them with gracious nods, overwhelmed by the response. It was everything she had ever dreamed of and nothing she had expected to experience at this stage of her life. As the applause continued, a small figure broke from the front row and ran to the edge of the stage, Lily, her face shining with tears and pride. Rose bent down to embrace her granddaughter, the one who had set this whole incredible journey in motion with a simple act of belief. "Thank you," Rose whispered. "For what?" Lily asked. "For seeing me. Really seeing me." Later that night, after the reception, after the champagne and congratulations, after the critics had filed their glowing reviews, Rose sat alone in her apartment. Her flowers filled every available surface, their sweet fragrance perfuming the air. On the coffee table lay a stack of business cards from music schools, record producers, concert promoters, all eager to be part of her unexpected second act. Rose moved to her old upright piano, the faithful companion of her quiet years. She ran her fingers over the keys without pressing them, feeling the familiar ivory beneath her touch. This piano had heard her joy and sorrow, had been her confidant and comfort through all the seasons of her life. It had never asked for anything in return for its steadfast presence, only that she play. She began to play softly, not Rachmaninoff this time, but a simple lullaby she had composed years ago for her first grandchild. As the gentle melody filled her small living room, Rose reflected on the strange and wonderful turn her life had taken. Fame had come to her late, but perhaps at exactly the right time. She had lived a full life, loved deeply, known both joy and sorrow. She had nothing to prove, no desperate hunger for recognition or approval. The music had always been enough. And now, somehow, her private passion had become a gift she could share with others. Not just the technically brilliant performances, but the story behind them, a reminder that talent doesn't expire with youth, that dreams don't have deadlines, that it's never too late to be discovered, even if what's being discovered was there all along. Rose smiled to herself as the lullaby came to its gentle conclusion. Tomorrow would bring new adventures, new challenges, new music to share. But tonight, in the quiet of her apartment, she was simply herself, a woman who had always known what she loved, and had loved it faithfully whether anyone was watching or not. That, she decided, was the real beauty of her story. Not that she had finally been discovered, but that she had never needed discovery to find fulfillment in her music. The applause was wonderful, yes, but it was the playing itself that had always been her true reward. With that thought warming her heart, Rose closed the piano lid and prepared for bed, ready to embrace whatever tomorrow might bring.